Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Unit 6, the last unit in our bridging the dementia divide from the University of Derby. Thank you all very much for participating in this course. We've had some absolutely extremely good feedback from you, and we appreciate that. And we've had some excellent contributions through the discussion forums, so thank you for that as well, and also for the questions that you've submitted. So here we are, as I say, in our last unit, and this unit, the learning outcome for this unit was to evaluate the current approaches to end-of-life care, maintaining personhood and quality of life. During this unit, we heard Wendy Wesson, one of the nurses from the University of Derby, discussing the bereavement process and the grief felt by carers. And she says that this may feel like guilt. Carers may feel that they're letting their relatives down, their loved ones down. And I wonder if this is because perhaps with Western medicine, we're focused on cure. And we find it difficult to accept that we can't cure everything. And perhaps not only professionals, but this transfers also to carers who think, maybe, is there any more we can do? So what she's discussing, what Wendy was discussing, was the need for support for carers by professionals. So I'd like to just take a moment to think what sort of support we're talking about here. And you may want to consider, if you're a professional, what kind of support do you think you might be able to give to the relatives, the carers of people with dementia? And if you're a carer, you might want to think, well, what kind of support do I actually need? And if you know what you need, then maybe when you talk to the professionals, you can ask them in very specific terms. Some may be clued up as to what you need, and others may be less clued up. So what kind of support could be offered? Certainly practical advice, I think. Caring for somebody, nursing somebody, especially towards the end stages of their illness. If the person is being nursed at home, nursing is a task which would be new to many people. I can recall a friend of mine who had his elderly mother was coming towards the end of her life, and she was being cared for at home. And one of the problems that she had, I should say, is that she kept falling out of bed. And even though she was being visited by a district nurse every day, and she was examined for injuries, she kept falling out of bed. And this friend just happened to mention this to me, so I said, well, why don't you put a pillow underneath the mattress? Because one side of the bed was against a wall, so I think if you put a pillow underneath the mattress, it just gives that little bit of elevation, and she won't fall out. And sure enough, she didn't. Now, it's a very, very simple thing, but practical advice such as that might be helpful. But particularly, I think the need for support, that is psychological support for carers, is paramount. There is a process which is known as anticipatory grief. Now, grief is something which we experience when we lose something or someone. But when we know that our loved one is dying, and even though it may be perhaps even a few years away yet, we still know that, first of all, we're losing part of that person. We're losing maybe the love, the affection, the spontaneity of our loved one. And we're losing them in stages. But also, we can think ahead to that time when they won't be with us. So this is anticipatory grief. It's knowing what's going to happen, or rather, knowing something's going to happen, but we're not quite sure how we're going to manage in that situation. So this is a very difficult stage for a person to be in. And my own, for what it's worth, my own advice would be that every carer needs someone to talk to. They need someone outside of the family. They need a professional that they can talk to and just offload their fears and feelings. It may be that, you know, we can say things to a stranger that we would not wish to say to our family. Like, you know, I've had enough, I can't cope. Saying the unsayable, really, but to somebody who is dispassionate enough, i.e. A professional counsellor, who would understand the feelings of that person. So recognizing anticipatory grief and recognizing the feelings of perhaps guilt that an individual goes through is, I think, very significant, and we do need to make sure that those needs and those feelings are addressed. One of the other things, of course, you might do if somebody is feeling guilty about not being able to do enough, not being able to care for the person, or even feeling guilty about being bad-tempered, because, you know, when you're tired and the person is making demands, it's very easy to get a little bit bad-tempered, and you regret it later. So to know that these are normal feelings, that this isn't a sign that you're a bad person, I think the professionals can help to convey this, these ideas, and helping the person also the carer also to think about the person as they were when they were well, and focusing what kind of a relationship they had with them. So you're looking not just at a sick person. The carer is not just looking at a sick person, but is looking at a person who has been well, who's lived a life well, who's contributed in whatever way they can, and is now in a state of need. And that person, as a carer, needs the support and needs the encouragement to know that, you know, they are actually doing as well as they could be doing. But acknowledgement doesn't dwell on the end person. This is what I'm trying to say, really. It depends, or acknowledgement is concerned about the well person, or the person as they were previously, and we have to acknowledge, or help the other person to acknowledge that they are caring for somebody who has lived this good life. I'm repeating myself here, I realise this. But we also have to, as professionals, acknowledge and make the carers know that we acknowledge the positive things which they're doing, because quite often people focus on the negatives and say, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but I'm not doing enough, or I am feeling bad-tempered, or I'm feeling tetchy, or whatever. But as professionals, we can acknowledge that, yeah, look, you're doing as well as you can, and you are here maybe 24/7. So we have to make people feel good with themselves, but not in an unrealistic way. We have to point out the good points that the good things that they're doing. But the business of well, it's not a business, I beg your pardon, the wrong expression, but the process of dementia is, for everybody, it's a difficult one. And this relates to what we've been discussing and studying in this unit, which is the loss of personhood. I am the person I am. I am a person who, I'm a friend to people, I'm a father to my daughters, I'm a sports partner with other people, I'm a worker, I do lots of things, and I can look at my life and say, this is who I am, this is what I do, I support myself, I look after myself, and so on and so forth. I have so many very positive things that I can talk about myself, and you can do that as well if you look at yourself. What do you contribute to your family, to your society? But when things start to go wrong. When chronic illness occurs, and especially with something like dementia, where the illness is not just physical, but also behavioral and mental. Those things which define us as a person start to slip away, and the person with dementia ceases to function in a way that previously defined them as a person. They may have been a breadwinner, they may have been a homemaker, they may have been a partner in a relationship, or a parent, or a worker. Whatever they were, this is being taken away. So this loss is happening, and this takes away a person's self-esteem, especially in the early stages of the illness, when the person has sufficient self-awareness, and they then become aware that they can't do what they used to be able to do. Maybe they can't cook a meal or be the breadwinner or whatever it was they define themselves as a person by doing. So gradually self-esteem can slip. Now, if we know the diagnosis, if we know that a person has dementia and is beginning to lose their ability to focus, lose their ability to perform tasks, then perhaps the carers can, by degrees, take over some of the role, take over some of the things which the individual person could previously do, but allow them to do as much as they physically and mentally can do, so that we're not taking things away from somebody. We're not going to say, oh, I'll do this because you can't do it, or I'll do that because you can't do it, but we'll rather take the view, what can you do? You carry on doing that. What you can't do, I'll do. I'll take over. And that helps to maintain an individual's sense of dignity and a sense of self-worth. Kitwood talked about 10 elements which were discussed within the module. And some of these were disempowerment, labeling, stigmatization, and invalidation. And disempowerment is this notion of taking things away, saying, well, I will do that because I can't trust you to do it, when in fact the individual, the person may well be able to do something. So taking responsibilities away from people is disempowering them, and again it's depersonalizing them, it's taking away their self-dignity. By labeling people with a label like dementia, or unfortunately some other pejorative term, makes a person feel uncomfortable and feel that they don't have the respect that they used to have. And stigmatization, this is the process whereby, and Irving Goffman discusses this, which is referred to within the reading material. Stigmatization is the process where other people put a label, and they see the differences in a person and put a label on them, or treat them as different, and that person then becomes, the person with dementia, the ill person, comes to see how they're being seen and starts to act the role, starts to perhaps shed their self-respect, their previous values, and not the values and beliefs, but the previous activities, and becomes the sick person which other people say they are. Yes, they will become that in time with dementia, but they don't have to. We don't have to hasten the process by stigmatizing people. Now, on the subject of dementia, I beg your pardon, on the subject of stigma, Marina asked a question, Marina Benecker asked the question, how could we prevent stigma for people with dementia? My first thought on that is that maybe we can't always. People will perceive what they want to perceive. And if somebody wants to stigmatize somebody else, if someone wants to devalue somebody else, we can't stop them from doing it. But if we're aware of it, then we can perhaps try to promote a positive image of the person. Often people see what they see and will stigmatize somebody out of ignorance. It may be that they simply don't understand. So by explaining the process of dementia, by explaining, look, this person isn't stupid, this person, my husband, wife, whoever, is simply less able to do things because there's a physical process going on in the brain. And so by educating people, by giving them information, and this is the kind of information that was available in Unit 1, by sharing this information, you may help to change other people's perceptions of the affected person. But for ourselves, I think I like the notion of that Carl Rogers, a psychotherapist and humanist philosopher, discussed, and that is unconditional positive regard. That is to say, I accept you for who you are now. Whatever your failings, whatever your faults, you're the person I love, I accept you. You're my friend, I accept you as you are, no matter how your illness is going. And this process, or this concept of unconditional positive regard, is one which charges us, if you like it, and it invigorates us to behave in a positive way towards the affected person. It allows us to respect the person regardless of their condition. So whether or not we can prevent stigmatization, I think that depends on how receptive the stigmatizing people are to being educated. But let's talk and let's try to help people to understand the value of that person, the value of the person who was and is becoming less and less because of their illness. Another question which Marina raised was about palliative care, and she said, can palliative care be more peaceful? Well, I'm not sure, because it's individual, isn't it? It's palliative care is the care which is being given to every individual according to their needs. Now, I don't believe, for example, that there should be one process. You know, this is a checklist of palliative care, and this is what we do for all dying people. Now, clearly, that's not appropriate. We have to look, and as nurses, as professionals, in whatever field we're in, we have to look at the needs of this person and also the needs of their family, because I don't believe that palliative care is something we just give to dying people. It's something that we share with the people who are suffering with that person. So, can it be more peaceful? If we do the best we can, that's the best we can do. But I think when we look at the needs of the carers, the needs of the loved ones, maybe there's a little bit more we can do. I mentioned a few weeks ago about a friend of mine whose mother-in-law is in the end stages of Alzheimer's disease. And sadly, it looks as if the end is coming soon. And she's confined to bed, and she's not responding to anything. And it looks as if she's just like basically going to die quite soon. Now, I was speaking to my friend only last night, and I was asking how things were. And she said, excuse me, she said, the nurses aren't doing enough. And she was quite angry. She was quite angry about this. And remember that anger is part of the grieving process. Excuse me. I don't normally talk for so long without interruption. But anger is part of the grieving process. And what my friend is experiencing is anger. And she has to focus this anger somewhere. And at the moment, it's being focused on the nursing staff. So I just listened to her and I said, well, okay, what would you like the nurses to do? And she said, I'd like them to keep her comfortable, to keep her pain-free, to change her when she needs changing, to give her drinks when she needs them. And I said, are they doing that? And she said, yes, they are. So I said, well, can we ask any more? And she said, no, we can't. And it's what I was trying to do was to help her to accept that there's a limit to what can be done. And there's a limit to what can be done in palliative care. So what I was trying to do in that situation was help my friend through the grieving process. Another question that Marina asked related to a statement that Wendy Wesson made when she said that people with dementia need to give you something. And Marina said, no, this is unprofessional. We give our caring. We, as nurses, give our caring. But maybe we can get something from the patients. Maybe we can get something. Perhaps we can accept the insights which they give us. If we're talking to patients, they may respond in a rational way and tell us how they feel, or they may not respond in a rational way, but that still gives us information. It tells us something. So I think we have a duty to accept whatever we can learn from those patients, and also from the ones who are close to them. So I relate this to suffering, the notion of suffering, which was also discussed in the unit. Suffering is not just a concept, it's the actual reality, it's the experience of the person who is ill. And if we can learn from that experience, if we can learn how the patient is feeling, either first-hand or second-hand through their carers, then we are getting some insight into their suffering, and with those insights, we can perhaps obtain some ideas as to the nursing care which the patient might need. So thanks very much for those questions, Marina. I hope I've been able to answer them reasonably well. That really concludes this particular unit. I'd just like to summarize the module as a whole. What we did in Unit 1 was to understand what dementia is, and that is looking at the physical brain changes and the behavioural changes which occur. Unit 2 was about dealing with compassion. It was about how to communicate with patients and how to deal with compassion. We looked at the notion of truth telling. Is it right or wrong to tell lies to people? And not everybody agreed that it was right to tell white lies, but there did seem to be an overwhelming view that if telling a lie meant preventing the patient from being upset, then lying, not truth-telling, was justified. We also looked at communication through memory, and Yasu, remember, talked about his grandmother, and what brought her to life really was music, and the music of her childhood. So that's a way of getting through and into the to the mind of the person really with dementia. Unit 3, we discussed independence and maintain the quality of life. And then in Unit 4, we were looking at the global health priorities. And we shared the idea, well, Dr. Carrie Peterson shared her ideas and insights with us about the Smart Homes initiatives, which she was exploring. And you were also asked to find out what your national strategies were, and it was lovely to see on the discussion forum that you were sharing your ideas internationally. People were looking at each other's national strategies, and some were saying, look, my country doesn't have one, but what you've shown was interesting. So that was a lovely way, I think, of this, I would call it a community of carers for dementia. It was a lovely way for this community to come together and share ideas, and I think that sharing has been a feature throughout the module on all of the discussion forums, and I'm really, really pleased that you've done that. And last week we talked about integrating care and the need for interprofessional working. So there we have it. That's the conclusion of this MOOC on bridging the dementia divide, and I'd like to thank everybody for contributing. Oh, and I mustn't forget, before I do finish, the lovely contributions that you've made in this week's activity, which is sharing images. We have a mass of lovely images which represents something to you about dementia, and I've looked at them. I don't know, I've lost count of the number I've seen, and I would say that if I had to categorize them, there's obviously a great sense of loss. That's one of the overwhelming features, but I'm looking at somewhere on roads, for example, disappearing roads, or a person standing alone on a road, perhaps representing the solitary journey that the person with dementia takes, or crossroads, not knowing which way to go. There's an iceberg. I like the iceberg picture. To me, that represented what we see now is a person with dementia, but the 7/8 below is that person, that whole person. Mist came into the images quite a lot, and that's easy to understand why. Mazes, and naturally loss of brain by being represented through perhaps leaves being blown off a tree, or people using erasers to rub out part of the brain, a part of an image of the brain. So yeah, there are a lot of very, very powerful images there. I was telling an artist friend about this morning actually, and she said, "Oh, that would make a superb exhibition." And maybe there's food for thought there. Perhaps we've got your images. We may be able to make an exhibition of images of dementia. So again, thank you very much indeed for excellent contributions. Now, finally, the summative assessment. And the summative assessment, that is due in today. And everybody who submits will be invited to peer review 5 other submissions. Now, Heidi asked the question, how long before we find out, and is there a chance for a resit? Don't worry, Heidi, you're not going to fail. If you submit something, you have submitted it, and you will get some feedback. But it's not a pass or fail. It's a recognition that you have, that all of you who submit, it's a recognition that you've put this effort in, and that you are sharing your ideas through this final submission. So that's it. If you have submitted something and you are invited to peer review 5 other pieces, please do it, because again, it's part of this community of sharing, which I mentioned earlier, and it's shown respect for your colleagues who have shared their ideas with you. So there you go, that's it. Thank you very much indeed. That's been, for me, a thoroughly enjoyable MOOC, and from the feedback that you've given us, I think many of you have got a lot out of it as well. But thanks to you all for your contributions and to staying with us. Thank you.